This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today's guest is Scott Stanton. Scott is known as the original Tombstone tourist. It's a pleasure to have you on. Scott, you know, it's interesting. 30 years ago, you started this hobby that somehow has morphed into this elaborate, amazing thing that most of us have been able to enjoy. So you're known as the original Tombstone tourist. Tell us more about that.
So what had happened is I was in the music business for about 5 years. I did everything from work in a recording studio. I worked in dozens of bands that were all terrible, and I did all of that. And I gave it 5 years, and I said, if I can't make it, then the cards are just not. It's not in the deck. I'm going to move on. And I got a master's degree in finance, and that actually worked out really well. I have this right brain of finance and left brain of artistic. So I was able to use that to, some level of success. But what I had to do was I traveled all over the world. And when you're a financial consultant and you're dealing with C-level people, you're on for like 8-9 hours a day and you're exhausted. And so one day I was in Macon, Georgia, and across the street was Rose Hill Cemetery. And I go, that looks really pretty. I think I can clear my head. Nobody will bother me. I mean, it's a cemetery. You're not going to get interrupted. And I'm walking through it. And there was like literally 20 people waiting on this hillside to walk down to the grave and pay homage. It was like a Tuesday. And it turned out to be Duane, Allman, and Barry Oakley. And I was like, oh my gosh, did they die today? Is this their anniversary? Is this a birthday? No. As somebody in Macon said, no, that's Tuesday. That's our number one tourist attraction. So naturally, being a musician and having time on my hands in the evening, I started going to cemeteries, and then I started photographing them. This is around 92, 93, and the internet just started. So I started posting them. Everybody else was doing cat videos, and I was posting dead rock stars. And I got a level of success. And then I published a couple of books, The Tombstone Tourist Musicians, and the second edition, which was released, a long time ago, 15 years ago, that had over 1,000 musicians worldwide. And what made me so unique is I told you exactly how to get to them. Because like say in New York, if you go to Woodlawn Cemetery and somebody says, oh, go find Miles Davis, it might take you an hour or two and you'll just happen upon it. Whereas I tell you, you don't have 5 hours to look for somebody. I'll get you, as I like to say, within 6 feet. And it kind of just morphed from there. But the problem with books was the minute you publish them, somebody else dies and it's irrelevant. So it took me a long time to figure out how I wanted to approach this on the web. And so I created 3 years ago, 2 years in design, and then 3 years ago we released it. I've got over 1,000 musicians. And then I also have everybody else. I have history, you name it, politicians, crime and their victims. I have half of New York mobsters under that category. But I still have musicians because I love musicians and I love the aspect of it. And the interesting thing about musicians is everybody thinks, oh, if you go to Humphrey Bogart's grave, it's just going to be tons of flowers. Absolutely not. No, because people don't go see Humphrey Bogart's movies 10, 15, 20 times. But if you go around the corner to Lemmy of Motorhead, yes, every day people are there, they're paying homage. It's just incredible. So music has it's really ingrained with people, and they really do seek out the graves. And it's nice because it's nice to see even some of the most obscure artists being remembered. So that's how it got started.
Wow. I really appreciate this because, you can think of so many concerts that you were at, but you can also think of so many concerts that you were not at. And I was a huge fan of Dio, Ronnie James Dio. And,
Yeah.
believe it or not, I never got to any of his concerts, not in any of the bands he was in. So do you have any, kind of fascinating people like Ronnie?
Oh yeah, the funny thing about Lemmy and Ronnie, they're both buried at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills, and Lemmy has a very simple plaque right on the ground. It was his cremains, and then if you turn around, there's Lemmy with a giant sarcophagus and a statue on top and marble work. And then he's got the devil horns on both sides. He's throwing horns on both sides of the sarcophagus. Always has red roses. And what's even funnier is there's the exact same sarcophagus about 100 feet away, and it holds the remains of Liberace. So you have Liberace, Lemmy, and Ronnie James Dio all within about 100 feet of each other.
Oh wow. So out of those three, the most kind of elaborate would be Ronnie with the horns.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely beautiful. Yeah, very nice, very nice.
That's amazing. And I haven't seen Liberace, but does he have a piano or anything piano related?
Yeah, he does. He has an iron piano. Actually, it's a quite large sarcophagus. So his brother George is there, his mother is there, and when Liberace's museum was open, his sister ran it, and I got to talk to her, and she was just absolutely fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
That's interesting. So how many actual family members have you actually run into while you were, scouting about?
I would say at the grave, I would never go up to him ever. But I have them call me, and they see the biographies that I write about him and all the links and all the videos. Because the unique thing about my website is, I'm going to help you find their grave, but I'm also going to help you find where the statue of Lemmy is at, not the whiskey, not the Troubadour, but the restaurant that's next to the whiskey. And Lemmy used to live downhill from there because he would walk uphill sober and he would walk downhill when he was drunk. And they have that life-size statue of Lemmy right there at the bar. But, Johnny Horton's daughter, she told me the whole story about Johnny Horton, Hank Williams, the mother, the premonition that he was going to die in an auto accident. And she was very lovely, very nice person. And that is the one sad thing about musicians is I think Roy Acuff is the only person who died of natural causes. Musicians, a lot of times it's live fast, die young, and for some people that's kind of interesting. For me, it's a little more reflective, like how much more music could we have gotten out of them, if they had lived a little bit longer. Like Lemmy, he worked up practically until, the month before he passed. He still was going full bore.
Yes, you make a lot of good points there because I could see the two sides of it with the family. I could see them being appreciative because you're not just reflecting on, the death of their, talented family member. You're also explaining the life that they lived, and the talent and the local places where they actually entertained and, made their presence in certain neighborhoods. But I could also understand how, sensitive and private people want to become because that person that had all the fame is now not there. So it's harder in some way to be able to share those memories because, the person is not there. So I get
Yeah.
it. I totally get it. But, there are individual stories that I still find really interesting. I'm a huge fan of Elvis, and I've been to his home twice. And there's so many things like there was the original cemetery where his mother was, and they ended up like moving the cemetery, and then all of that movement. A lot of people don't know. I recently brought up Elvis in the past week, And the person was a huge fan. And I said, well, you've obviously gone to his home. And she said, no, never. And I was just like dumbfounded. I was like, wow, she knows more songs and more lyrics and more history of Elvis than I do. And she hasn't been to his home. So do you know all the innards to moving his family members around and all of that?
Oh, I have one better. So I was at, I think it's called the Black Forest Memorial Gardens, and I think that that's the name of the cemetery. It's a very large, expansive, kind of flat cemetery. And there's a mausoleum in the back. It's a one-story mausoleum. And that's where Elvis, if you watch the old footage, and there's Colonel Tom Parker in a pair of shorts. And it was August, if you remember, it was like in the 90s, just blazingly hot. And they walk in there, and that's where Elvis was first interred. Now, I was looking for Bill Black because Bill Black was part of the original Elvis trio. Turns out he was buried right behind that mausoleum, but there was a giant, like, rose bush covering his whole stone, memorial stone, and I didn't know where he was. So this little old lady comes, she was like 5 foot nothing, in her little golf cart, comes racing over, and she goes, did you find, I heard you were looking for Bill Black. And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, he's right over here. And she walked right to his grave and pushed his bush aside. And she held it while I took photographs. And I said, well, thank you very much. How did you know this? She goes, I own the cemetery. And I said, really? She goes, so you know that mausoleum is famous for? I go, no, what? She goes, that's where Elvis was first buried. So she told me the whole story about Colonel Tom Parker showing all that disrespect in the shorts and the family and the heat and people passing out. And then like a month later, these guys thought it was a really bright idea to steal the body of Elvis. And they got the casket kind of halfway out, and then they were caught. So not too long after that, like a matter of, they sealed everything up, they closed down the mausoleum. Then one night, Elvis's dad shows up in a station wagon at 3 a.m. They had already dug the hole by the swimming pool. They came in, grabbed the casket, and by 7 a.m, all that concrete and that slab and rebar, and then everything was done. And Elvis was buried by 8 o'clock in the morning that next morning. And that's where he's been ever since. Absolutely funny story that the owner of the cemetery told me all of that.
Wow, that's amazing. So when that all kind of went down, I was probably, I don't know, in third grade or something, but I remember hearing it on the radio. Did any of that stuff leak to the public? Because now we have so much social media and so much, availability of, gossip or TMZ or whatever. So during real time, did anyone know about someone trying to steal all of that? Did that ever hit the news? Or they just said one day Elvis has been moved?
Yeah, I think it was the latter. I did not. Everybody saw it was on the news. Back then news was a half hour, and Elvis was half of the news. Think of CNN compressed down to a half hour, and Elvis is half of that. And so we all watched that every day because the streets were just packed with fans, and they were interviewing people. And then a driver came through and hit a woman, and she died at the scene. People were passing out from heat exhaustion. It was just very badly run from what I could see on TV. That probably wouldn't happen today. They were like when Michael Jackson passed away, they rented out the Forum in Los Angeles for his services, and that holds like 20,000 people. But yeah, that was quite a big deal. And like you, I've been 3 times to Elvis's home, and 2 of them were during Death Week. That's so badly, horribly named, but that's the week in August that he died. So they call it Death Week in Memphis. And I was standing knee deep in Elvis impersonators. I was the only one without mutton chops and black dyed hair. But people really, really get into it.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah. No, the 2 times that I was there, were in colder weather. So I was there one year around Christmas time to see how they decorate the home, with the Christmas lights and all of that, which was beautiful. But there was another event that I had attended that I actually went out of my way to attend. And it was President Bush, the first President Bush, Sr., and he was laying in the rotunda at the Capitol. And I stood on the long line outside because I had joined the military under him. And I
Hmm.
waited on the long line, and it was so amazing the way they had done it because they had these professional memory cards that were left out. Everyone had to sign the visitor books. I mean, it was really like incredible. You could actually write a little message to the family. And
Well,
then
that's great.
you actually like stood there and they have the procession. They have members of the military that actually are timed. They have like these timed, they do a cadence where they actually walk around the casket. It's timed. It's completely silent, like no one could have their cell phones going off or anything. And that was beautiful, but I haven't seen anything else quite like that. So, have you been involved in anything that would have been more towards politics or maybe someone like that? Because the Bushes are actually interesting people. They're not just politics. They were like ranchers, and a lot of people knew them to be kind of like Texans, and so they had kind of a little bit of a more reach than just politics.
Yeah, yeah, interesting enough, even the politicians like in France and Germany and England and all through the US, I have a world leaders section. I try to stay away from politics for obvious reasons, and people come to be entertained and informed. But yeah, I try to find, like MacArthur, if I'm, and where he lived, where he died, where he's buried, and things like that. But generally, I don't actually go to the funerals. I went to a viewing of Herb Alpert because he died during Jazz Fest, but I don't want to take that away or anything like that.
Yeah,
I
that
always
yeah,
very respectful about why, the family needs to grieve and process it.
oh yeah. I wanted to touch on the New York Dolls. We just lost David Johansen,
Yes.
who was iconic in the whole punk scene. So, have you any experience with the rest of the Dolls? Because he was the last living member.
Yeah, he was. It was quite sad because he suffered through cancer for 10 years. In the old days, people would die after 6 months to a year, but a lot of people live with cancer, and he did. But he had that really nasty spill down the stairs, broke his spine, and it was just his last months had to have been very, very, very hard on him and his family. I think the first of the New York Dolls that I got, and it was funny because I went to New Orleans Jazz Fest and I stayed in this hotel. I forget the name of it, but I have pictures on my on under Johnny Thunders. I stayed at the actual hotel in the actual room where Johnny Thunders died. And I was in there, and as I was checking out, the woman goes, "You know whose room that is?" I go, because we were talking about music. I go, "No." And she goes, "That's where Johnny Thunders passed away." And she showed me her album, and there's a picture of Johnny being taken out. And so he died in New Orleans, but he was buried up in Flushing, New York, at Mount St. Mary's under his birth name. And but it's really funny. There's a couple things people didn't realize is, you know, Johnny Thunders like to live his life hard, live fast, die young. But the Roadies used to call him Johnny Blunders because he made so many mistakes in concert. Sometimes a whole string would just go completely out of tune and he would just keep playing. And the other thing, there's this story where it says one of the musicians he was meeting in New Orleans to record with said he heard Johnny passed away and he was still at the hotel and they were going to bring him out. And he stated that Johnny was in rigor mortis holding onto his guitar. And he finally admitted that he just made that up because it sounded so rock and roll.
Oh wow, so that wasn't true, huh?
Wasn't true. But what is true is Jerry Nolan, another talented member of the New York Dolls, is buried. I think he's buried maybe 50, 60 feet away from Johnny. So he's there. Arthur Kane. In fact, all of them, all the originals have passed away. Arthur Kane, he played bass. I do believe his girlfriend or wife still has his ashes and she hasn't decided what to do. Billy Mercier, most people don't realize he was the original drummer. He lasted approximately a half a dozen concerts before he overdosed at night after a concert in a hotel room. And his girlfriend did everything she could to keep him alive, except actually call for medical help. And so what she did is she kept him awake and she poured coffee down him. He drank so much coffee, he didn't die of an overdose. He died of drowning of coffee. And that's what it actually says on his death certificate. So the drugs and the alcohol didn't kill him. It was the coffee. So go figure. And Sylvain, he's buried at Mount Hope Cemetery in New York. I forget exactly which city, but he's got a very nice stone. So yeah, that's the New York Dolls.
Wow, that's so interesting because yeah, a lot of people were really paying tribute to him recently, especially since of the whole New York City influence. Staying in the punk scene, you know,
One thing I do want to say about David Johansen, I don't know why he wasn't a bigger actor, because his role in Scrooge with Bill Murray was incredible. He was the taxi driver in that movie. And if you don't remember it, go on YouTube, there's clips of him. He was brilliant. And he had that look, and he was tall and thin and had a long face, and he just had he could fit in so many movies, and he was very, very talented. And I never understood why. Maybe he just didn't want to go in that direction, but I thought he should have been a lot bigger than he was.
Yes, well, in the early 1990s, I was living in the New York City area, and that's when he was doing his Buster Poindexter Hot, Hot, Hot. So that was the only time I was able to see him live, and he was like a live wire. He was all over the floor. He had all of us getting up and out of our seats, and he was just really a complete showman. I mean, literally, like, so full of energy.
Oh,
So,
that's great. Yeah, I
yeah.
never saw him. That would have been a good one.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And that was such a hot song at the time. You know, all the stations were playing it, and it was really a lively.
I go sailing in the Caribbean about once every 4 or 5 years, and I will tell you that song is still very hot down there.
Very funny, yeah. So one of my more favorite bands, staying in the punk scene, is the Ramones. And, you know, I talk about them so often. I've had Monty A. Melnick, their tour manager, on my radio show. He's a great guy. What would you like to talk about regarding the Ramones?
Well, as you know, two of them are buried in Hollywood Forever, in Hollywood, and that's home of oh gosh, you have a lot of musicians there. You have Johnny and Dee Dee Ramone, and right next to Johnny Ramone is Chris Cornell, and Bianca Halstead of Betty and Blowtorch is buried there. She's buried right next to Dee Dee almost. Dick Dale, the guitar genius, surf guitar. And then you have some jazz favorites like Woody Herman and Art Pepper. There's probably there's two competing cemeteries for musicians. You know, you have the Woodlawn Cemetery and their jazz corner, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then in Hollywood Forever, you have a lot of the more current, last 10, 15, 20 years. So that's your East Coast, West Coast rivalry there. But yeah, Dee Dee Ramone, that he's an interesting character. I think he was Joey was the first to go. And he has a stone next to his father that overlooks New York City. So it's kind of apropos. It's really quite nice on a nice day. You get to see New York City from his grave. And a lot of people don't realize that he was, I don't want to say that he was sick or that he was ill, but he had health problems almost his entire life. And the reason he passed away is he had severe ADD or ADHD, whatever they call it today. But he had to do things in a certain order, you know. And what he was down at the studio, and it was the winter time, and his steps in the sidewalk were icy. And he was undergoing therapy for I don't think it was leukemia, but it was a type of cancer. And it was keeping it down. He was doing the protocol. Everything was going great. Then he slipped and fell on the ice right out his front door because he thought he forgot to lock the studio door. And he went in the hospital. They took him off the therapy. They did the surgery, but the cancer came raging back within days and he was gone in a week. So that was really unfortunate, for him, but he did suffer. And I think that's why that was part of the rift between Johnny and Joey was Johnny was, the de facto leader, and every band needs one. There's a lot of negative things said about him and his belief system, but those four guys needed each other. And Johnny was the de facto leader, and Joey was, he toughed it out, but it was a tough 20 years for him. The next to go was Dee Dee. He overdosed. He sent his wife out for groceries and he overdosed on that couch. I was over there to see if she still lived there because I took a picture of the front door and her name was still on the doorbell. I think she's still at that apartment. So she's still in Hollywood. And he was the one that wouldn't go out in public without his trademark look because he said people expect it. I'm a Ramon, I'll die a Ramon. And then you had Johnny passed away from cancer. And the interesting thing about that is Dee Dee is actually buried where he's at, but the giant statue that we've all seen of Johnny on guitar, his wife still has his ashes. And that's just a memorial. When she passes away, then they're going to have a big ceremony and they're going to inter the two of them at the statue. And then the final Ramon, Tommy, I actually photographed him. He was my complete. I was able to get all the Ramones. He's out on Long Island. It's quite a drive, but I was finally able to get his gravesite and his home. And a lot of people said the same thing. Everybody thinks that rock stars all live in these giant mansions, and a lot of them, certainly have earned it and live in nice digs. But Tommy had almost looked like a row house, out on Long Island. It was certainly nice and it's not cheap, but it is just so funny to see that. You would think it would be this palatial mansion or whatever, but it wasn't. It was just a very simple row house. And his, I think she was his girlfriend. She still lives there today. So
very interesting. Yeah, they were a really big part of New York City, and I was just so happy to see so many things that have kind of remained to be a tribute to them. They were affiliated with Forest Hills High School. So if you go out to the high school, you'll see the street sign says Ramones. And then if you go over to, I think it's 2nd Avenue, they have a street sign that says Joey Ramone. It's just, there's just things that pop up around the city that just remind you about the Ramones and the influence of the Ramones. So,
oh yeah.
Other than that, I mean, another punk influence would be someone like Sid Vicious, or do you have any information on that scene?
From what I understand, I haven't done the full biography, but I've collected all the information. Sid Vicious was cremated. And when they were in Heathrow Airport, they dropped his ashes. And 3/4 of the ashes got scattered by all the commuters. And so he's part of him is part of Heathrow Airport.
I've never heard that. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I don't think he's buried. I don't know who has his ashes. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm flummoxed by the Sex Pistols because I was around when they made that big splash and disappeared literally overnight. but they had a couple of great songs. A Motley Crue used to cover some of their music in concert. So I know that they have the chops there, but I do know that Sid Vicious, they would turn the volume down, and they had another bass player in the back playing most of the parts. He just had the look of punk, so you know.
That's interesting. One of my friends actually went to the gravesite, which I have to do this summer. But I talked about meeting Rick Ocasek in my second book. And, you know, we met him one night. He was walking his dogs down the street where he lived in New York City. And, you know, he's just so cordial. And it was just a big part of our years growing up with music. And he's buried in, you know, not far from me, and it's a beautiful headstone, because when he passed away, his family had released on social media a doodle that he had done.
Yes.
And they took that doodle and they transposed that to the headstone, and that to me is just incredible.
Yeah, I did a full video and a commentary on that, and there was huge backlash over one sentence that I said. And so what I did kind of a walk up to his grave and all different sides because of the artwork. And it's a very unusual stone. It's not a flat, but it's perfectly square with artwork on all four sides. And it's really nice. And the cemetery, very small, very peaceful, out in the middle of nowhere. It was like a 2.5 hour drive from Boston for me. And I talked about the Cars, and I talked about Rick Ocasek, and I said, the thing about the Cars they didn't move at all in concert. They came out, they played their song, and they left. And, you know, for me, I like the interpretation. You know, like I like when a musician has played that song 4,000 times and he's got to play it for 4,001st time. What is it going to sound like this? What's he going to do? What's he going to change? And I said the other thing was the Cars never achieved the level of success that they should have because they didn't tour. They played less than 100 times, 100 concerts in the 10 or 12-year period. And Rick Ocasek said, I just don't want to travel at all. I'm done. And so they didn't even replace him and go out. I mean, now Elliot Easton and one other, they formed a band and they're doing a tribute to the Cars, which is long overdue. I mean, they're like the Pretenders, the B-52s. They're a summer band. They should be out there for 2-3 months, you know, playing the outdoor festivals, the zoos, the whatever. You know, I think people, you know, of all generations would love to hear that music played again. And they were very good musicians too. But boy, did I get backlash for that.
So
People are like, what do you mean?
Everyone has an opinion, I guess they say, yeah.
But I thought I'd be honest because the best bands are the ones that play live. You know, they go out there and do their dues. I mean, the Stones, even in their 80s, still kill. You know, and they're changing it up and they're releasing new music. You know, I really appreciate that when somebody really goes the effort. But you have to play live. And as we all know, you can have 1 million streams and you'll get a check for $8, you know. So they have to go play live to make any money.
Yeah, you know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about all the people that we lost that were so young. I mean, I can see like Amy Winehouse in my head, and I could just, you know, there's certain artists that it's just incredible. They were just so young. So which artist that was really young that really took you by surprise? Like for me, Amy Winehouse took me by surprise. Not the matter of how she died, but the amount of talent that would have came out of her is just astonishing to me.
Yeah, Dolores O'Riordan of the Cranberries. That's a tough one because I listen to her music today. I'm over 60. I'm not her demographic, but the first time I heard her live and that screeching interlude in one of her songs, most people would think that was noise. And to me, it was like, oh my God, you're just very animalistic. And then she weaves it right back into that melodic voice. And it was like, she was just so talented in the songwriting. And I really felt bad for the rest of the Cranberries because that she was the magic, and those guys were excellent musicians and they complimented her beautifully. And all four of them were just excellent together. And they took a break for about 7 years and were coming back when she died in the bathtub, just slipped under because she was having severe back pains and she was using alcohol to lubricate it. And I get that, but take a shower next time, I guess.
Yeah,
But that's a tough one.
yeah, that is really, that is interesting because of the style is so different. Another person that had a life filled with controversy, but also an amazing style of music is Sinead O'Connor.
Yeah.
Another voice that, the minute she put out a couple of notes, you turned your head and you're like, that's Sinead. Like certain ones just have this sound that just kind of resonates right out of them.
And I don't think a lot of people, if you watch the Saturday Night Live 50th anniversary, there's a music special, runs about 2 hours, and they talked about the time that she sang a cappella and ripped up the Pope's picture, and everybody just she was like the start of cancel culture. That was the end of her. And now, when you go back and look at her history and you look at the history of the Catholic Church, and it was now people finally get it. And now I think they're starting to realize they're finally, okay, now we're past that. What was she like? What were those first albums like? What was she? Now they're reinventing her and rediscovering her music, which is great. I mean, she shouldn't be remembered for that incident. I mean, it's an important part of her life, but musically speaking, she was a genius.
Yeah, that I understand. And I recently saw a clip, when you look at social media, random clips come up of someone which I hadn't really, seen before. And one of the newscasters had a last day, I think it was Brian Gumbel, and the staff kind of like pulled a prank on him. And they said, they had a surprise guest for his last day. And out comes in like a three-piece suit is Prince. And he was just like, what? This is Prince. And Prince like walked over to the piano and, did a song for him for his last day, being an
Wow.
anchor on that show. And when he did it, he kept kind of like looking over his shoulder and smiling. There was some kind of like a little private joke. I think Prince had been on the show and he probably was dressed like the way Prince usually did, not in a three-piece suit. So there was a little bit of a joke in the background that he wore a suit for this man's last day, But when he played on the piano like that, you like literally it pulls at your heartstrings because his music was like so incredible. And,
Yeah.
just how he would sit at the piano, like he just was like smooth as silk, it was just incredible. He was another death that kind of took me by surprise, because it was like April, you know what I mean? It was just like one day I jumped in the car and radio came on and they announced it. I was just like, what? Where is this coming from?
Yeah. And, I understand the death of Elvis because people didn't really understand addictions and, the cross effects of multiple drugs and things like that. So you can go, okay, we'll cut him some, or anybody in the late 60s, early 70s, some slack. But nowadays, Tom Petty, Prince, there are so many people that have so many doctors that don't communicate with each other. Whereas, I have a lot of health concerns, but I can tell you all my doctors have all the same information because I don't want to have somebody doing something that negatively affects other things that I'm doing. And it was so sad, like you said with Prince. Well, actually, there was a world renowned detox doctor and his son, who was a therapist, I believe, were on a plane to help Prince, and when they landed, he was dead, and he was going to go into treatment for his addiction, and it was just a day late, and that was really really sad. Fortunately, Prince was a genius, and he I believe there's between 600 and 700 songs completed or nearly completed in his catalog that have not been released. So you could release an album every year for 70 years, and you probably still wouldn't have released all of his music.
Yes, I actually went out to Paisley Park and I walked through that whole place, and I literally was like completely touched because you could really feel his energy. You could feel his spirit on that property. It was just really incredible. Really a powerful person in the business. Another person I wanted to bring up, but I'm going back in time because I was too young to get all the details. But a lot of people talk about the influence of Janis Joplin.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about her? Because a lot of people kind of reference her.
Yeah, Janis, that was a horrible summer when Janis, Jimi Hendrix, and lead singer of the Doors, Jim Morrison. That was one hell of a summer because we lost all three of them in a span of like 4 months. Janis grew up in Beaumont, Texas, and Beaumont, Texas is considered, and I'm sorry if any of your listeners are from Beaumont, it is the least educated, probably the most racist county in America. It's and I worked there, so I know what Beaumont is like, and that's where she came from, and she's this hippie girl that was radically different than anybody else in Beaumont, and even her parents basically kind of disowned her, and so she moved out to California where free spirits were welcome, whether you were the Dead, the Jefferson airplane, it didn't matter. You're welcome. And when she met up with Big Brother and the holding company, that was the end of it. They too, they would have gone on so much better if they just cut their drug and alcohol intake by 50%, because they were true. All of them together were just excellent. The thing about Janis is the restaurant is still there. I can picture it, but they have the table where Janis sat on her last night, and the trick question is, what did Janis have for her last meal? And the answer is 9 tequila shots. And then she went back to the hotel, Landmark Hotel. She had been clean for a while, but then there was this black tar heroin going around LA that was extremely potent. And that was that. She died almost instantly upon injection. Her remains were scattered at, I believe it's Pismo Beach up north. Beautiful area of California. All of California coastline is beautiful. And, if you want to rent her hotel room out on the night that she passed away, good luck. There's like a 6-7 year waiting period. I actually stayed in it. It's a nice, it's a kind of a rundown hotel room, but it's the Highland Inn, and you're right in the middle of Hollywood, so it's awesome. I've actually stayed in a lot of rooms where people have passed away. Graham Parsons, Janis Joplin, it's just another way to pay tribute to them.
Wow, it's so interesting. When I was a little girl, there was always a story circulating about, there was more than one story about it. So the question was, just like you said, trivia, how did Mama Cass die? And there was always a lot of different stories about how she died.
So what had happened was, okay, there's no denying that Mama Cass was large. She was a large woman. And if you look at the pictures, she yo-yo dieted. So she would lose a lot of weight and then gain it all back, lose a lot. So it took a lot of stress on her heart. I believe she passed away when she was 39, something like that. She was in New York, London. And she was staying at this flat near the theater where she was playing. And what had happened was, after a show, she came back, she was sitting up in bed, and there was a half-eaten sandwich, and the coroner was in there and everything, and an assistant coroner or a doctor looked through the doorway, saw the sandwich, and said she choked on a ham sandwich. There was no truth to that. There was nothing even remotely. She had a massive heart attack and died. Now, what people don't realize is That is the exact same flat that Keith Moon passed away in the same bedroom. And that flat was owned by Harry Chapin. And he sold it after the second death and said, I don't want anything to do with this real estate in London ever again.
Oh, I had
So,
no idea. I didn't know that second story. That is fascinating.
yeah, that's what you see. That's the part I love about the history. It's like people make this stuff up and you have to debunk it and you go, wait, there's something even better, more interesting about this story. So
That's really interesting. There's a lot of women singers that we've lost, and it's incredible because every once in a while I'll be, turning on my Sirius channels and listening to the 70s and the 80s and, going back and forth. And every once in a while I'll catch my favorite song. And unfortunately, it's the only song that I really like that she did, but she did so much, but she died very young. Her name was Nicolette Larson, and she did
yeah.
A Lot of Love. And every time that song is on, I'm like, oh, I love this song. But she also died kind of like oddly as well.
Yeah, she's actually on my website. I did that 2 years ago. I forget. I remember that she has a very simple grave at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills, just a flat marker. And, that place is like, I think it's 150 to 200 acres. So without my directions, you would never find her. Yeah, I believe she's buried like right down the street from David Hutchinson from NXS. 50% of his ashes were taken to California and 50% were kept in Australia. But yeah, I forget how Nicolette passed away. I know she was in her 40s.
Yeah, there was something about her having liver disease. There was something about her going back and forth about taking medications.
I'm going to have to go read my own website to see if I've got that right.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
I wanted to riff back on what you were talking about, Prince's Museum. Even if you're not into jazz, even if you're not into, that type of music or anything old, you have to go to Louis Armstrong's museum, which is his actual home there in Queens. And it's absolutely stunningly amazing. It takes maybe an hour. It's a nice guided tour. But if you're in New York and you haven't driven over there, you absolutely have to go. And then he's right around the corner in the cemetery with a trumpet right on top of his black marker. It's really cool. But a lot of these artists, they're now finally opening up their homes. I think Elvis was kind of the first. Jim Reeves was the first. He died in that plane crash. But now, you have the Country Music Hall of Fame, you've got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But I think the individual artists that have their own museums do it so much better. I think the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, if you haven't been to it, you got to go to it once. But there's just like so much, you know what I mean, that it's hard to like concentrate. Whereas you go to Satchmo, his house, and you don't realize what an artist Louis Armstrong was because he used to make his own tapes well before it was hip. And then he would make the covers and do all this artistic stuff and decoupage. And it was really quite incredible, the life he led. And he lived in hotels his entire life until he got married to his final wife. And she said, I'm not living in no hotel. We're getting a proper house. And so later in life, like when he was in his 50s, he finally bought a house, but he always stayed at these luxurious hotels and had room service and all of that. I thought that was kind of an interesting lifestyle back then.
Wow. So as we wrap up the interview, I mean, I could talk to you forever. What are some upcoming graves that you have kind of on the horizon that you still need to cover for this coming year?
Well, interestingly enough, Karen, my videographer and partner, wants to live for about 2 months in New York City. And she said, is that okay with you? And I said, absolutely, because I have about 70 cemeteries I need to visit. New York is just, I could spend a year there doing 10, 15 graves a day. I could spend a year there. It would take forever. Interestingly enough, I'm going to Nassau here in a month, and I'm going to go sailing through the Exumas. and I'm going to stop off and visit with Anna Nicole Smith. And I've already talked with a tour guide that was there when the funeral is there. So he's going to show me the grave and give me his take. In a lot of my videos on YouTube, I'm now bringing in experts, people that either know the artist personally or work at the cemetery and have the inside scoop. So I've been, expanding my video collection on YouTube and TikTok on that. But I have well over 1,000 biographies, and I calculated there are probably about 40,000 really famous people in this world. So, and I have 30,000 photographs and hundreds of videotapes that I just work on it all the time and post as fast as I can. But I'm definitely coming to New York, definitely going to LA for 2 weeks. And then I've relocated from Massachusetts to North Carolina. So now we have this whole area out here, North Carolina and South Carolina, and all the way out to Memphis and Nashville.
Wow. So you plug your website so that everybody can go and check out where you are and your social media.
Okay, so I'm Scott Stanton, the original Tombstone Tourist at thetombstonetourist.com. I am also on TikTok as the original Tombstone Tourist, and I'm also on YouTube as the original Tombstone Tourist. And all those links are at my website. But please come to my website. It's not just about graves. It's more about the person. I have tons of videos. I have tons of links. So I kind of got the idea when you're watching a movie and you go, is that person still alive? Then I have everything. Where they lived, where they died, how they died, where's their family today? Where are Stevie Ray Vaughan's guitars? Can I see them? Are they on display? Questions like that. Where did Lemmy go drinking? Where's his statue? All that stuff. So it's more than just about graves. But hey, everybody likes a good grave hunt.
Wow. Well, it is a pleasure to talk to you. And again, thank you again for spending time with me and sharing all of your knowledge and all of your expertise on the life of the musicians that we've discussed today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
You have been listening to Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium, Dream Central Station, LLC. My audio editor is Al Hemberger at the Loft Recording Studios in Bronxville, New York. This is WNEW 102.7 FM radio.